hoping that you'll have some maybe new tools, or maybe we repackage some tools you're already familiar with. You can take back with you to start to put this into play. Because that's really, as I said earlier this morning, our big goal is to kind of launch all of us out there helping to get MPAs on the map for the people of California and beyond. I just spent a couple of weeks in Australia and traveling along the south coast, and they've had an amazing system of MPAs for decades now, very successful MPAs. And I was amazed, though, to see that on the tourist maps that you would pick up at your hotel or at the Chamber of Commerce information stations that showed all the key points along the coast, it showed all of their MPAs on the tourist maps. And when you stopped at a state beach or a roadside an interpretive kiosk, if there was an MPA there, it would talk about that MPA. So they're way ahead of us in terms of putting this not only on the map, but putting it top of mind for their population, anybody that gets to the coast. And I'd like to extend that challenge to more than just the folks that get out on the water. Over the last couple of, a lot of yesterday, we talked about some amazing efforts to educate user groups to get out there. So the boaters and the scuba divers and the fishers. But that's a portion of the people in this state. And these MPAs are really a gift to the entire population of California. So the advantage we have is a lot of that population gets to the coast. We have contact not only with the local divers and fishers, but when you're talking to people at any site along the coast in California, you're really talking to folks that come from Manteca and Fresno and Naiva and all those other amazing places in there. They need to know about this just as much. And as Don Kelly was saying, the more we can get the word out about MPAs and give everybody a little sense of ownership over these, it's going to cut down on his workload a whole lot. Remember, I think Julie was saying in her presentation about Channel Islands, that when they look at who their rangers and wardens are contacting, about a third of them don't have a clue they're in an MPA. Another third don't understand that the activity they're engaged in is not appropriate in that MPA. And then about 1/3 are the real violators that know they're doing the wrong thing and they choose to do the wrong thing. Well, if we can let Fish and Game focus on that 1/3, we can easily address the other 2/3 of that audience. And we make Don and a whole lot of other enforcement people real happy. I talked a little bit about making emotional connections with folks. And most of us came up through an educational system where we did just that. You sat down quietly and paid attention to an instructor in a classroom, and your teacher taught you calculus and geometry and social studies and all kinds of stuff. And you wrote it down and took the test and passed. So for most of us, that's kind of what's in our mind when we think about getting information across to folks. And that is one way to kind of feed people's minds. But did any of you ever have a teacher that really kind of captured your heart also, really inspired you to pursue something? Did they do a lot of lecturing, or were they involved in was there a little passion involved? You could tell that they were really into this topic and they had a way to convey that to you. The way to really reach people effectively is more than just information. Information is crucial. It's got to start there. But then we need to add some parts to it. And I'd like to walk you through a quick process. It's a great way to go from those real basics to really kind of making those deeper connections with folks. Let me start with how most of us experience the world around us. Everything that you know about the world around you comes in through just 5 basic channels, your 5 senses. And our brain has the amazing ability to file that information and recombine it over and over again. And of course, we build all kinds of elaborate constructs and concepts and so on out of those sensory impressions, but it starts with our 5 senses. And any audience that you are interpreting to, that's what they're working with also. People love to go to the ocean because it is such a multi-sensory delight. So the basic basic resource that we have to work with is the tangible resources out there, things that people can experience directly with their five senses. So I just picked on it. And we're going to pass this around. And just as we pass it around, if you can describe something that stands out, something that you get through your five senses, not something you know about the abnormality, but something that you can detect through one of your five senses. And I'll start. I'm going to say it's smooth on the inside. Light. Light in terms of the density of it? Okay.
The color range, the reds. Shiny.
Association. You put it here, and you can hear it.
Okay.
It doesn't smell.
Okay. Good. And right now, let me tell you, I've done this a lot. Lots of people have handled this, so we can leave taste out of it.
Good. Okay.
Somebody needs to lick that.
Don't be licking the trash.
A pattern of holes.
Okay.
Textures. A rough texture in the gloss.
Okay.
It has bumps and ridges. Oh, of course, outside. Oval.
Yeah.
It's
Respiratory holes decrease in size and are closed as you get closer to lips.
So the holes are different sizes.
patterns. You need patterns.
I'm going to put that one on hold. And I'll explain why. Thank you for doing that, by the way. Yeah.
Cool.
Moving the touch.
Yes.
Can I say that I can use it as a essential?
You can say that, but you're
Shape.
jumping ahead of me.
Okay, so I don't want to say curvy shape.
The design puddles in the bottom, I don't know if that's...
Okay, so yeah, it's got that interesting
Layer.
layer.
Okay, together with that.
Yeah.
No,
It's unbroken.
Okay, yeah.
Knobby.
And I made John jump through this hoop a while back. We did this over at the museum.
Yeah.
So.
I don't remember what I said.
Yeah. We've got a good list here.
Spiral. Rodney spiral.
I'm going with dead.
Yeah.
Okay, and you're ahead of me also.
Okay.
But that's the perfect segue, because these are things that we could sense. I mean, just using our basic five senses. And this is important because when you're working with an audience, and when we start, this is an abalone shell. What if you're on the beach and you've got a variety of shells, and algae, and sand, and rocks? Now, what if we start to talk about the waters beyond? The environment gets very, very complex. And trying to get people to tune in, to really understand it using their basic senses is a challenge. So we get so used to seeing things with our mind that somehow we lose the ability to really go back to our 5 basic senses and articulate how we sense things. So,
Yeah, the father of young children, I think children are much better at this than we are. If you let the kids sort this out. Yeah.
we haven't put all those layers of stuff on top of it, so children see things very clearly with their 5 senses. Yeah, and children would have licked this by now.
Yeah.
So this is important though, because we live in a virtual world in many ways, and I think when people go to an outdoor setting, when they come to the shore, when they go out there, certainly when they come even to the aquarium, even though since it's indoors, people want to smell the salt in the air. They want to touch the water. They want to see how the water moves. They like to feel how slippery the algae is. They like to touch hermit crabs and sea stars. And we have all of these amazing sensory opportunities in the real world that a lot of our audience they don't have those opportunities in their day-to-day life. So doing just what we did here, having a chance to really experience even a simple abalone shell, is a pretty unique experience for a lot of our audience. So don't overlook this. It's a real key piece of it. But we're going to take it another step now. You mentioned beauty. Steve talked about depth. You talked about tools. Those are all things that we know about this camera. But you get those, and they kind of come in through your senses, but now what you're doing is you're adding knowledge to experiencing this abalone. You know what death is. You know what beauty is. And those are constructs that we built up over the years. And the more experience, more life experience we have, the more education we have, then we've got this deepening library of these concepts and constructs and beliefs and values, all the stuff that resides up here that we add to. And those are very powerful filters for the information coming into our senses. So I'm going to pass this around again. I want you to think about this. This may go a little slower this time, because now you've got beyond your 5 senses. You've got a lot of wheels turning up here. Is there something that this shell symbolizes? Is there some concept? Is there some value or belief? Some theory? Some knowledge? You talked about the decreasing size of the respiratory folds here. That's absolutely true. But we not only see that, but we also have to understand there's respiration, and you know, there's a lot of knowledge behind that observation. So when your eyes and your mind start working together, all of a sudden the list gets a little bit broader. Ready to give it a try? I'm not going to start this. Shall we reverse it? We'll put Steve on the spot again. Or what, should we just start with your...
Well, I'm an otter, and this is really, really yummy.
Taste would be kind of the tangible part, but the whole idea that this is food.
So that otters think they're tasty.
Not only otters, but they're tasty.
That's why I was thinking is the whole living part of it is gone.
Okay. So there's a corpse. kind of a life and death aspect to it.
It's rare.
Okay.
It fed a lot of fishermen.
I am, by the way, not responsible for spelling. Just the content.
How expensive.
How about remove otters and be more apps?
Okay. So it's part of the system.
Yeah.
You can still go with beauty.
Take the easy way. Okay, it's positive beauty.
It's a perfectly good one.
Exploited.
Changeable. I'm gonna go with the kind of uses thing, the whole bowl, changeable.
So there's utility to it.
Utility, decoration, any uses kind of thing.
I think memory. I remember my mother using these as ashtrays.
Yeah.
In Maryland, it was a trick.
So memory might be the process, but what you're
Yeah.
going back to is even a sense of kind of family or,
Right,
or
right.
It's a marine creature.
Okay. As opposed to the other marine creature that was in the audience.
It's half of a complete shell.
Yeah, well, actually for an abalone, that's the whole, they're one of the ones
See,
that.
that's what I.
That's the
It's
whole
a snail,
outfit.
so it's like
Yeah.
it's a wow.
But it's only half of the animal, isn't it?
Yeah, so, okay, then growth rates, that's what these are.
Mhm.
It just reminds me of the ocean. Filter.
Okay.
Oh.
That one's been around for a little, isn't it? It's not getting any older, but it's.
No, it's, it lives better. Native Americans.
Right.
Protection.
Okay. Yeah. Are you accusing me? No, that's, no, that's true. So there's, is that a, so there's actually two elements to protection. You were talking about the shell as protection for the animal, but there's also a legal framework that protects these from illegal harvest.
Money.
Money, good, good. Very different list. The intangibles are when we allow our mind to go to work on something, then topic starts to expand a little bit. So in abalone, I mean, there's the biological significance, how it's a real key member of kelp forest community, but there's certainly a real economic value to it, not only currently, but also in the past, because it was such an important trade item for almost any native culture up and down the coast. And not only in North America, but you go to Africa and Asia, you see abalone shells that have been used for thousands of years for trade, probably because of their intrinsic beauty. So there's a huge cultural component to this, not only our current culture, but past cultures. My Native American friends were here, they would remind me that we shouldn't refer to them as, they don't like being referred to as a past culture. They're still here in line. They dress like we do, they drive cars, and they're part of our current culture, but they have their own heritage as well. There's a special set of these intangibles we call universals. And what we mean by that is it's a kind of an intangible that everybody has had some experience with. So when I talk about it, no matter what your background is, where you're from, what you've done in your life, it means something to you. So let's take a look at our list here. Food. Everybody had some experience with food? Okay, so if we talk about eating abalone, now something different is going to come to every person's mind. But the minute I talk about eating abalone, you can at least relate to food. So I have your attention. It's a great universal. Life and death. Has everybody had some experience with that? Yeah, it's probably different for all of us. But we've all had some experience. We all get this in our own way. What about the idea of something being rare? It's an interesting one. I'm not sure in it, and I would say for older audiences, probably. I work with a lot of school groups and younger kids, and the idea of scarcity, something being rare, endangered, I don't know if that's universal across all age groups.
What if you thought that was precious?
Well, and precious, kind of is a combination of value. Something can be precious on the basis of value or utility or those kinds of things too. I think maybe there's a lot larger constellation that is what I call survival, and whether it's a survival of an individual or the survival of a population or a species. I think in a lot of ways, most folks have had some experience with survival. And again, it's very different. Survival for you or me is like, oh man, how's the market doing this week? You're not worried about something huge running in here and eating you, or where your next meal is going to come from.
They'll get you first.
Yeah, that's right. Survival is a different thing for us than if we were living in East Africa, and in a little boma there, and you had to worry whether the lion was going to jump over the gate tonight. But we all understand survival in some way. Sustenance kind of goes maybe back with the food thing. Value, and the idea that things have value are probably related. Dollars or cost is just one way of placing a value on something. And utility, maybe.
Protection of the law, wouldn't that be valuable also?
Pardon?
Protection of the law, that would be also valuable.
Yeah, and that may be another way of assigning a value to something, because if it had very little value, we may not have that kind of. Value is universal, but it's expressed in different ways. So I would say that there are all different aspects maybe of this one, that things have value to us. But MPAs, I'm hoping that we can convince our audience they have value to us. Explaining it in dollars and cents may not be the best way to get there. It may be that the survival is the best way.
But it would depend on your audience.
Make that argument to a group of fishermen.
You know,
Mhm. Yeah, fishermen.
That would be more important.
Definitely. Yeah. You know, they're looking at the utility of MPAs, I think, and the ability to generate a living.
It's a small point, but I've done a lot of oral histories with children who grew up with lighthouses, Peter's Bunkers, Point Sur, and such. And they always talk about the difference in the abalone. There was family abalone, there was friends abalone, and there was guest abalone. And you can talk about red, you can talk about pink, you can talk about black. The latest different grade of abalone as to how they relate that individual.
So, you know, what you're getting at is actually another really big family and history and heritage and legacy. Those are very important. Intangibles as well. Let me go through and just throw a couple of others out that seem to come up a lot. The idea of beauty, kind of exploited, goes back to survival maybe. History and heritage, time, legacy is another important one. Culture. Everybody gets it. It's different. We each come from different cultures. But we get the sense that we all have a culture, that we're part of a larger social system.
Excuse me, Jim, we're just getting pretty close to wrapping up. So.
Okay. So, to cut to the chase, when we're talking about, when you're interpreting anything, but since we're talking about marine resources and marine protected areas, what you have to work with are the tangibles. You've got what's out there. But if you want that to really be salient, if you want people to get it, and if you want to trigger an emotional connection as well. When I say life and death, survival, beauty, family, heritage, culture, do those things also resonate at an emotional level? Absolutely. As I was saying earlier this morning, when Patricia was talking about growing up down on the wharf, you're like, oh yeah, I wish I was a younger brother. You know, that sounded so cool. She was talking about her family, her heritage. And she had all of us right there. Because she was really talking about marine resources, but the intangibles. So, whatever you're interpreting, try and get in touch with what are the tangible aspects. But focus on, beyond the intangibles, a handful of the universals that relate to this. And when you start explaining it, when you start interpreting it in terms of universals, your audience will all get it. It's instantly relevant. It will resonate on the intellectual and the emotional level. It'll change how they feel about it, as well as what they know about it. It's a really great shortcut to make those connections. Okay.
So we're all going to file right through this little...
Over the next few minutes, I'd like to talk about one of the best shortcuts I have ever found for making those connections with our audience at both the intellectual and the emotional level. Because if we really want people to value, to find some meaning and significance in marine resources, MPAs as well, then they really need to feel some deeper connection than just basic awareness. It starts with the awareness. Everybody needs to know what's there. And they need to know that in enough detail that they have kind of a vision of what that that marine environment looks like. But beyond that, they need to feel closer to it than just having knowledge of it. And what we're about to do is a great way to get folks there. I picked just one simple object, just an abalone shell. It's probably something almost everybody has to work with. If you talk about the oceans anywhere on the California coast, abalone probably fits into the story somewhere. And with just one simple object, I'd like to illustrate how this works. Everything that you know about the world around you came to you in just 5 ways. It came in through one or more of your 5 senses. That's the only route for stuff to get into your brain. And of course, by the time you've been around a few years, your brain has collected an amazing, just a wealth of sensory data and impressions about the world around us. And then our brains have this incredible ability to keep combining and recombining all that sensory data and building elaborate constructs and concepts and theories about the world around us to elicit patterns. Our brains do amazing things with that, but it all starts with what comes in through your 5 senses. So when we're interpreting something to an audience, it's got to start there. The way they're going to know what's there is using their senses to start collecting that data. The more senses we can put to use, the better. So I could stand here and tell you about abalone shells, but it's going to work a lot better if I hand this around. And I'm going to ask you, as we hand it around, to think of one tangible aspect of this, something that you can sense about this using one of your 5 senses, and only your senses. I'm going to ask you to shut your brain off for a minute. That's hard to do. Well, for some of us, it's a little easier, but it's really hard not to see this with your mind's eye, but just to focus on your senses. And I'm going to start. I'm going to say that it feels smooth.
Taste salty.
Okay. I forgot to mention how often this bin's handled. Thank you for taking a bullet for the sake of the activity.
I see 4 holes.
Okay.
I don't hear the ocean.
Okay. It's amazing. I held that up and I heard fluorescent lights humming.
It's very strong.
Okay.
Very rough.
Faint odor of sea salt.
Okay.
It's more.
Reddish. Okay.
Lots of color.
The inside is shiny.
Oval in shape.
With patterns on the inside. Has bumps on the outside. It's sharp.
There's a ridge around the inside.
Ah. that's a tough thing to do, to see things just with your five senses, not to start adding all the things you know about an abalone. But if we were all 4 years old, and we didn't have that body of knowledge about an abalone, this is probably where we would start. In fact, we'd be grasping for just the words to try and articulate what our senses are telling us, if we've never been to the ocean before. And I talk to people every day here at the aquarium, so I know they also get to the rest of the coast that have never seen the ocean. And they might as well be 5 years old also. They've never seen an abalone. They've never had a chance to experience it. So this is really important. It's something that we often overlook when we start interpreting, is making that first connection, making sure that people are tuned in to the ocean using their five senses. Just the smell of the air, the temperature of the water, listening to the waves washing up on the beach, the wonderful aroma of melting or rotting kelp flake. You don't inhale any kelp flake while you're taking that deep breath. There's a lot of sensory impressions out there that will really strike people. So don't overlook them. This part is really important. But it goes beyond this. Because when we engage our mind and we start adding all the things that we know about an abalone, then you realize it has tremendous symbolic value. We know a lot more about its role in the system, in the ocean. There's all kinds of other things that, once we add our knowledge base, then we start to come up with a whole list of what we would call intangibles. So let's pass it around again. We can start back here since you have it. And is there something that triggers a thought, an idea, a concept, a memory, a value, a belief?
My grandparents had an abalone shell when I was very young.
And I'm going to interpret some of these a little bit. So you're really talking about family.
When I learned to dive, these were covering abalone. It was something that it was very common to see. And I used to eat them. But now, when you go diving, at least in where I come from, Channel Islands, it's considered just a rarity, sort of a novel thing to find one.
First thing that came to my mind was the whole process of cooking these and shelling them and pounding them and breading them and deep frying them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Another vote for food.
Well, mine is a vote for family too. My dad and my grandmother used to have a system for taking abalone. My dad would never put his hands under a rock, and my grandmother would never put her head under the water. So between the two of them, they could do anything. So teamwork, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is what you're getting at, but I guess I have respect for this animal, the fact that it uses this section of its foot that will hold on so tight that it does take all of that energy from a human or a predator to be able to have it release.
And you know that's I'm gonna add one more to that. So that's a big part of its survival out there also.
I'd say unknown, because most people see the abalone in this shell, and we had a sample that they made a plastic mold of the actual what the animal looks like, which to me was way more interesting than just the shell, because I had no idea that it moved that way. Was a
Yeah, it's pretty mysterious.
So it's an animal.
I was actually going to say mysterious, because I've never seen one really besides the shell, so it's just kind of lots of questions about it.
and what they're like.
So I always thought this was either a soap dish or an ashtray.
That was one of the ones that came to my mind when I was
Yeah, utility is
Yeah.
that's a big one.
Yeah, I mean, I just always think of the first time I saw this, it was, I only saw the inside, and then when I saw it when I was diving, and I was like, that's what an apple, oh, it's that neat. You know,
Yeah.
how different it is, you know, the form of it and everything.
On Sonoma Coast, you can still tank abalone, so we have a lot of diamonds, actually. And it's not like it's a dark thing for me, but also it is one of the first trading tools between Fisheye and Kodiak. And the Kodiak man would go back to Kodiak and be very wealthy. So it's a sign of wealth for a lot of native people.
There was a abalone aquaculture firm here that then began to grow pearls. And it was really unfortunate that it didn't get more traction, because I thought what a great multiple use of an emerging aquaculture industry.
When I see these animals, I think about telling children that they eat with the teeth on their tongue. And always watching the children kind of try to discover what that would be like if all their teeth were on their tongue.
Coming from the East Coast, this is a strange thing to me. And it harkens back to a more romantic time in California when things were not as dire. We had a little bit more money, there were more abalone in the ocean, and it was just kind of romantic.
I'll say I have a strong connection to abalone, but now as I look at them, I want to cry because it costs $50 to buy a plate of abalone.
Across the curtain.
Maybe it's
I'll put
60 or
sorrow
70.
down here.
When I used to eat them for free, when I used
Yeah.
to be able to die for them. Sorrow.
Huh?
Indicator for other species.
Huh? So it's boy, part of a living system.
We last people have a terrible time thinking of something.
Glad that I always think the first thing I think of is music, because as a guitar player, it's a good way into the next musical instruments.
Yeah.
Now, what we've just done, again, with the same abalone shell, without having to lick it, or, you know, we've allowed our minds to look at this. And you've also had a chance to connect to it with, you know, something that was meaningful to you. And if we look at this list of intangibles, there's a number of things here that are not only meaningful to you, but they're likely to be meaningful for anybody you talk to. They're things that we call universals. Something that everybody has had some experience with. Has everybody had some experience with family? Sure. It means something different for each one of us, but we all get family. What about food? Absolutely. You wouldn't be here if you couldn't relate to food in some way. Abundance is probably connected to survival, which, you know, is kind of life and death also. And adaptation is part of that. I can't read my own writing. There we go. The idea of kind of history and legacy and heritage. Everybody has that. It's different for each one of us, but we all get it.
Everyone in this generation has that. That whole idea, you know, just thinking about, when we're talking about family or beachcombing, they put a common shell and find on the beach, and First, I'm in Southern California.
But the shell takes you back to your childhood, your history,
Right.
your family, and the first thing you flash on is who was there on the beach with you when you found that
Right.
shell. Do you get where I'm going with this? With these universals, that are kind of the bigger picture things that have personal meaning for all of us: survival and life and death, and family, food, romance and wonder, art and music. That things have utility, that they have value, whether it's an economic value. Now, we could talk about abalone pearls today having value, or meat from abalone having value, or we could go back hundreds of years and talk about how abalone was a really prized trade item that you find not only here on the coast, but you find abalone shells in Utah. They made their way all across the United States because everybody admired the beauty of abalone. And boy, you could trade salt and abalone shells for anything you wanted from far inland. Throughout time, we have always been amazed looking at abalone. They have captured the interest, the imagination, the aesthetic of every human that has looked at an abalone shell. In North America, in Asia, in Africa, every place abalone occurs. So when we start to talk about abalone, or where abalone lived, geez, I left home out here. Everybody gets this one. We all got to have a home. It's different for each of us. Homes are a huge one. That's exactly what MPAs are. We're trying to create a stable home that provides for the survival of animals long term. When we start to talk about the oceans in particular, because I think that's a real different and kind of a foreign environment for folks. And when we talk about it, maybe from the perspective of things living in the ocean, because people seem to really relate to that well. If we start to bring in our personal stories, what we find meaningful, and we talk about these universals, your audience is going to find meaning in it right away. And 20 minutes ago, when I was talking about trying to make emotional connections, and I was like, oh, geez, how are we going to do that? You know, it's enough of a job just trying to get people to understand something. But the minute I start talking about family and survival and life and death, history and romance, homes, does that resonate down here as well as up here? If I wanted to get you to really connect emotionally to abalone, we started something we call personalization here. Imagine you were an abalone and you're living out here on Hopkins Deep Reef. And every day you've got to sneak out from your little crevice between the rocks to get as far as that next piece of algae to munch on. However, you've got Mr. Sea Otter cruising around overhead, constantly looking for breakfast also. He's just as hungry as you are, and you're his breakfast. So we have this little cat and mouse game. You're trying to get the food you need, you're trying to live, and he got a living, but you've got to constantly dive to sea otters. Imagine that would be. Any of you walk to school through a neighborhood that you have on a neighborhood home? I grew up in East Oakland. Getting to school and back was a real adventure. Maybe that's what it's like for the abalone, trying to grab that next piece of giant kelp out there. You know, you got to kind of constantly be looking out, which is hard when you don't have eyes and you're living under a shell. But you still have to somehow evade the attention of the sea otter and a few other things that would love to eat abalone.
Do you think they really do?
No, they're not thinking, okay, how do I get away from the sea otter? But there's something going on where they're able to do that. Because we still have abalone. Somehow they have an adaptation that allows us to do it. But if I get too far off in the adaptation, you start to stop. You stop thinking about it in personal terms. I talk about it and I stick to some of these universals, you're much more likely to relate to what it's like to be an abalone out there. Relating to an abalone is one thing. When you start to value the home and the whole system that makes life possible for that abalone and a whole lot of other animals, then you start to recognize the significance and the meaning of healthy ocean systems. That's exactly what marine protected areas are. So the shortcut to getting to that emotional connection is with these intangible and particularly the universals. How are you going to get this across to the people that you influence when you get back?
This may be hard to address today, but we have a lot of debate about what language, what words resonate with people and help you to get to that level. But I've heard some say, you talk about a network of marine protected areas and it just is lost on the general public. You've addressed healthy ocean systems and living systems. Do you have any advice on how we frame some of that?
I think you have to go back to the basics, home. You have a home where you live. Was that home in a neighborhood? Did any of you grow up in a neighborhood where you kind of knew the people that lived next door, maybe played with some of the kids down the street? Yeah, most of us did. I'm not sure how common that experience is anymore, but most people get the idea that their home is part of a neighborhood, perhaps. You could think of Hopkins Deeper as a neighborhood, or the Top Forest out here as a neighborhood. How many of you grew up in a city? And so in that city, you kind of had your neighborhood. You knew the route between your house and school and maybe the store. That's kind of what you identified with. But you also knew there were far-flung parts of the city, and that from time to time, you had to go to those other parts, you know. You went to a special event. You went to a dentist appointment. You went shopping for something special, where you used other parts of that more far-flung part of the city, beyond your neighborhood. But it was important that those were there also. That still kind of makes sense? You can relate to that? So is it kind of that way in a marine protected area where you've got your neighborhood, you've got your home range. You're a rockfish and you need the places where you can find shelter and where you can find food and maybe move seasonally, but that's pretty much, you stick pretty much to that. Except that it might be that your children need to go to the next reef over, or they need to have a place to move to. Most of us left home to go away to school or to find a job. Is that what larval rockfish do? Leave the home range, and they need to settle someplace where they can also make a good living. I'm a big fan of, and my scientist colleagues hate this because they think that we're anthropomorphizing and we're messing up their science.
You gonna say Disney?
Yeah, we're Disneyfying things, and I really work hard at not doing that. But I want people to relate to what's going on. And if you talk about the dispersal patterns of larval rockfish, you're going to leave a lot of your audience behind very quickly. But if you talk about how we all dispersed, any of you have relatives that came to the United States from another country? I would say virtually all of you do. Why did they come here? Why didn't they stay behind in Ireland, where mine came from, or any of those home countries? They had pressures. My relatives were all starving to death. They were NATO family. So they came to the United States. And this was the next jump that they could make, and they could start to make a good living. Is it that different moving from one MPA to the next to the next? We created these little islands of survival where we've improved the odds that you can land in that next spot pretty well, and that's why there's space later on. So putting, again, going back to these kinds of terms really help folks get it.
You can also use a farm metaphor too, reseeding. You know, when you're reseeding an area that's decimated by natural disaster, whatever, you start with islands.
Yeah. When you're logging, you know, you may take out a lot of trees and leave a few seed trees to scatter seed to start regenerating the next generation of forest. It's the same kind of concept. If you can't see it in the ocean, maybe you can see it in farming or logging or someplace else. And then you can transfer that.
I thought Rick's visuals from the Delta submersible showing that reef that had fishing pressure and wanted to be protected and those sorts of things, because one of the biggest challenges we have in trying to educate the public about marine protected areas is urban water. And even if you fish, you're at the surface, you're bringing things to the surface, but you're not seeing things in their natural environment. So
it all looks the same to me.
right, you know, it's just it's an abstract thing to kind of try to help. So taking some of those tangibles of species that families or folks are have experience with, or experiences like fishing, and then showing some of those visuals, I think those are very powerful images, you know. And this idea of shifting baselines, I think, is a great metaphor to use with people as well, as to sort of the importance of trying to set up these savings accounts along the coast. And thinking of those sorts of messages as making that direct connection again. But it's a difficult challenge because it is in a lot of ways the abstract, the unknown that we're trying to protect.
When the question I tossed out, okay, how are you going to start to introduce this to the audiences or the staff and volunteers that you interact with? I'd be tempted to start with their personal stories, kind of like what we did here. Because everybody's personal story, what brought you here? Can you remember the first time you came to the ocean? Why do you keep coming back to the ocean? When you stand on the shore and close your eyes, what do you see out there? When you ask people those questions, all of a sudden these things start welling up. Well, that's how you start to connect this. You don't start with what's out there, you start with what's in here. And you start making all those connections. You know, the first time I went diving, I couldn't believe the abundance of abalone. And I've seen pictures of that similar kind of abundance with fish out here. And it's very different now. My grandparents talked about their experience here. All of a sudden, we're not talking about shifting baselines. We're talking about your grandfather and your grandmother. And we're going to arrive at the same place, but we're getting there in a way that brings our audience with us. Both their mind and their heart traveling together.
I understand the resistance towards dignification and anthropomorphizing, but at the same time, I think personification is a type of metaphor that's really useful to get people to build those connections. And I mean, that's a respected literary device that has worked throughout the ages. And I think
it's a great technique, and I think scientists want everybody to get it. I mean, we've been hearing that for the last 2 days. They want the general population to really get what goes on out there. So their science takes on some meaning also. So, you know, I think we can do a lot more than just report facts about what we're doing out there. We have to do more than just report facts.
Well, and it's that connection and ownership that, you know, sometimes, well, we all get visitors from inland areas, and they go, well, how am I connected to the ocean? I'm just visiting. And that whole idea about the water flow and the systems and the runoff and then the personal responsibility, and it just seems like then they go, oh, like they have a place in it.
Yeah.
Because if they've never been to the ocean, or it's not their ocean, you know, then they don't get it. They don't want to get it.
And that's why I keep going back to, this is a gift to the people of California. I mean, some of the tax money you paid helps support these. Moreover, when you brushed your teeth in Pollock Pines yesterday, that water now is here. And if you're hoping to get some rain or snow this winter in Pollock Pines, things have got to be right out here. There are so many connections back here. First of all, though, I need to know you're from Pollock Pines. It starts with the audience. And then it gets easier and easier.
Is there the connection between cat litter coming around and, because they were trying to say, no, that's not true, and then that, yes, it's true, no, it's not true. And that's a big connection. People go, oh my God, I didn't know that. You know, that just seems like, whoo.
Kind of the kitty litter and toxoplasmosis in sea otters, there's a pretty good connection there. It's, the latest is that it may be more from feral cats than from flushable kitty litter. Because when we look at the hot spots where that occurs, it suggests that it isn't necessarily around like sewer outfalls. But yeah, you know, there are so many land-sea connections. And Meg was, when she talked about the major issues facing the ocean, they're not things that start in the ocean, they're all things that start on the land, far from the ocean sometimes. And that's why, how I interpret marine resources. I interpret people. I mean, we live on the land, and we need to focus on the people. As Doug Kelly said, we're really in the people business if we want to have a positive impact on resources. Okay. Well, I guess we're done. I hope that's useful.
She's subtle.